Hello! Welcome to the Created Worthy podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Damrell, and I am so grateful that you're here. On this show, I talk about creative processing and how to utilize it as a skill to bring peace, joy, and freedom into our chaotic lives. I also sit down with the most incredible guests as they share their stories, many of which for the very first time. We are all created worthy. Well, welcome, Alyssa. Thank you so much for coming and joining us on the Created Worthy podcast. I am so excited to hear your story and everything that you've been going through. I'd love to just start with you introducing yourself and whatever you have on your heart.
Thanks, Danielle. It makes me really happy to be here. I am a podcast junkie myself, and I've thought about recording my own at some point, but I'm just not there yet in my life. And so I feel like jumping on here and talking with you is kind of the best way to get my story out. All I really want to do is just kind of uplift other women and let other women know that they're not alone. I've listened to your whole first season and, just dove into some of the raw things that you put out there, and it was very inspiring for me. So
I'm so happy to hear you say that. I really don't know a whole lot of people who have actually listened to the whole season, so thank you so much for doing that. That means seriously means the world to me.
Yeah, of course. I like to go from beginning to end, and I'm just big on people's stories. And so anywhere that I can learn and kind of just even find solidarity in different things is important. And being a woman is hard, and it's been a hard job for decades, but it's really hard in this day and age, especially with social media presence and society and the way that as mothers, we are expected to just take on certain things, and no one really talks about the raw truth behind all of it.
Seriously.
And that it's not all sunshine and butterflies. It's a hard job.
It's such a hard job, and it's it's the most important job on the planet.
It is, and it's we're in a day and age of information, and having so much information at our fingertips that it can either be helpful or harmful, depending on your state of mind and where you're at on your journey. And I found that since 25, so 2 years ago, my outlook on a lot of things have changed. And I kind of stopped holding myself to different societal standards and realizing that it's okay to be real and honest and truthful, and to share the really ugly stuff, because that stuff is where you feel alone. And those are the things that you go through that you oftentimes feel like, oh, nobody I know has ever been through this. I have nobody to turn to. And you kind of just sit with your problems and process them in silence. And I learned the hard way that is not always the best way.
I am so excited that you're here and you're sharing your story, because I personally believe that just the ability and willingness to share your story is freeing. And it's one of the most freeing things that you can do for yourself. And it's one of the best ways to jumpstart your ability to impact other people's lives by owning your own life fully, wholly, truthfully, and with vulnerability. So thank you again for all of that, because that is the mission of this show. And I'm just so excited.
Absolutely. So I will start by saying I just turned 27 this last Friday, November 5th. So
happy late birthday.
Thank you. I'm a 27-year-old mom to 3 with my 4th baby on the way, but I also am a stepmother to 2 awesome bonus children. So this is baby number 6 for our family, and people, I know you think that I'm probably nuts.
I've always wanted 6 kids. That's always been like a desire of mine, to have a lot of children. So no judgment here.
That's awesome. Yeah, I became a mother pretty young, more unexpected than anything else that could have happened. I was told at 16 that I was not going to be able to have children probably naturally without a lot of fertility intervention. And even just a couple months before my son was conceived, I was told the same thing. And that was due to severe endometriosis and severe ovarian cysts that I had that were causing me a lot of issues. I fell pregnant with my son about 3 months after my 18th birthday, and it came as a shock to pretty much everybody because he was a birth control baby. I was strict on my birth control pill for years. I never missed a dose, but I was on antibiotics and had no idea that that was going to cancel out
I
the
didn't know
effects of my
that.
birth control. Mm-hmm.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I hadn't missed a pill for, at that point, probably 2-3 years. And I found out I was pregnant very early, about literally 3 weeks pregnant to the day. It was before my missed period, and I just felt really off and weird. I was not with the father at the time, who I will say is the father of all of my children, and my now soon to be husband for the second time.
Yay.
So
Well, we'll get into that.
we have a fun history. But I was going into my 18th year being a single mom, having a baby that I wasn't expected to be able to have. I was already moved out of my parents' house and living with roommates at the time. So I was completely on my own. And I knew from, being a little girl that I always wanted to be a mother. And so I felt that it was meant to be. And I went on with that pregnancy and had a very healthy pregnancy. He was born at 37 and a half weeks. And it wasn't until around 2 to 3 months old that his dad and I started actually connecting on a level and deciding that we wanted to be together. And so I went from one baby to 3 kids pretty fast. We moved in together when our son was almost 4 months old. And we had his 5-year-old son at the time, who is now 12. We had him on a pretty consistent basis. And so I stayed home with the kids and he went to work, and I went into a very domestic home life really fast. My son was born a month after my 19th birthday. So 19 years old with 2 stepkids and a baby. And then
So young.
and I
And
felt,
honestly, I think that we were pregnant at the same time
mm-hmm,
because I had my daughter when I was 19.
yep,
And
we were
yeah,
pregnant at the same
I
time.
remember seeing your maternity photos and being like, oh my gosh, she is the most beautiful pregnant woman I have ever seen.
Oh,
Like,
thank you
I
so much.
remember the dress and oh my gosh. But yeah, I had no idea what was going on behind the scenes. So,
Yeah, it was really crazy. And I actually ended up falling pregnant with my daughter in March of 2014. So that was right around the time we had moved in together. And I was on birth control with her also. So I was on an IUD, and I
are
hadn't
you
even been,
serious?
mhm, I hadn't been getting my period, and I didn't find out I was pregnant with her until May. I was already almost 11 weeks pregnant when I was told that I was pregnant, and I still had the IUD in. So I had to go through the process of having that removed, and knowing that because of the fact that she was conceived with an IUD, that there was a really high chance for miscarriage in that pregnancy. And so we just I had the procedure done to have it removed, and I was watched carefully for a couple of weeks by my doctor, and everything was progressing
Normal.
fine. And she was
Wow.
normal and healthy. Her due date was 1 year to the day from my son's due date. So I
Wow.
was due with my son December 22nd of 2013, and my daughter's due date was December 22nd of 2014. I didn't make it to my due date with either one. My son was born at 37 and a half weeks, and then my daughter came at 34 and a half weeks. So I had preterm labor with her. I went into the hospital around 34 weeks. They were going to give me the steroids for her lungs, and just to make sure if they couldn't stop my labor at that point that she would be okay. Well, it caused an anxiety attack and my water broke.
Oh my
So then at
gosh.
that point, I was not going home, and I actually had to wait 24 hours off of monitors to have another steroid shot done. And then they induced my labor. And I was in labor with her for 40, I think 47 and a half hours
Oh my
before she
gosh.
came. Both of my babies were born vaginally, epidural for both of them.
All the
She
way.
immediately went to the NICU. So we didn't have her. I didn't hold her for the first week of her life, and I didn't see her for the first 2 days of her life. I had a chronic infection in my uterus. I found out when I delivered her that I was pregnant with twins.
What?
Some point in the pregnancy, I had a vanishing twin, likely around 12 to 13 weeks, and she absorbed that baby. But she was delivered with 2 umbilical cords and 2 bags of water and 2 placentas, and 1 baby.
Were they
one
attached to her? Sorry, that's like insane.
No, 1 umbilical cord was attached to her and one wasn't. I had to deliver both placentas. They didn't know until I was getting ready to push, and they felt a second bag of water, and they were like, what's happening? My doctor was old school, so I didn't have like hospital ultrasounds with him. He used a really old, probably 20-year-old ultrasound machine, and he never picked up a second baby at any point. I Around 12 weeks, there was a time that he thought he picked up 2 heartbeats. And then he was like, no, that's your heartbeat. Okay, all's good. There's 1 baby in there. It was around 13 weeks that I had some severe bleeding with my pregnancy with my daughter, and
So
went
you
in and
probably thought that you were miscarrying at that
Mhm.
point.
Well,
Oh
yeah,
my
and I wasn't sure what
gosh.
was happening, but I went into the hospital and he checked me and everything was fine. She was healthy. And so when she was delivered, and they found that second bag of water, none of us really knew what to expect. And yeah, I delivered 2 placentas, 2 umbilical cords, one
How
baby.
how does that like how do you handle that mentally? Like you're not
Um,
it's not a miscarriage or you didn't know, but
yeah,
they're
so I think probably it was kind of hard to process. But at the time, I was just barely 20 years old, having my
right.
second baby. My son was not even a year old, and with my father, I had to be in the hospital for 2 weeks after she was born. So I was away from my 11-month-old for 3 weeks, and he learned to walk without me. So I had so much more going on with my
Right.
baby in the NICU, my 1-year-old with my dad, just trying to balance life, just so young, not
Mhm.
really knowing what to expect, going into preterm labor, having an infection after, and everything that comes with having a NICU baby. She couldn't eat immediately. So I was pumping breast milk for her, but she had a feeding tube and she was on CPAP machines. She couldn't
Wow.
fully breathe on her own at that point. I didn't really know what to expect. I
Right.
just kind of was rolling with the punches, trying to figure out how to stay
Yeah.
afloat. And my son couldn't go into the NICU with me either. And so I was like pregnant 1 minute, came back not pregnant with no baby, and then had to bring home a new baby when she was a month old to introduce them. And it was very unnatural for how that process typically
Right.
goes.
Did you
So,
have family support? I mean, you mentioned that
mhm,
your son was with your dad and
yeah.
you were back together with your boyfriend, right?
Yep. We were
Okay.
together. He was actually in jail at the time that she was born, finishing out a
Mm,
probation, so that we didn't have to deal with him being tied to any previous legal trouble he had been
right.
in. So he was serving out his time and he wasn't there when she was born. His mother was there with me. My mom lived 2 hours away from me, so I did have her support, but she wasn't there for me physically. But his family was great.
Right.
My dad was there. I mean, he
Right.
helped me with my son, but my dad and I have never been super close. So I really just relied on his family a lot. His mom and his sisters, his stepmom and his dad, they all really stepped up to the plate. They helped me throughout my
Mhm.
pregnancy, and I had my cousin at the hospital with me. One of my best friends who I'm still really close with, she was there.
So you
So
had
I
some
have
like
a lot of
emotional
support.
support as well.
Hmm.
Because man, I
Yeah.
just couldn't even imagine like one being so freaking young. Like,
Yeah.
let's not forget about the fact that you are only 20 years old at this time.
Mhm.
And you didn't even think you were going to be able to get pregnant. And now you're sitting in the hospital with two babies. Well, you have
Yep.
had two babies. Oh
Yep.
my gosh, Alyssa, you are a superwoman just with that
Thank
alone. And I
you.
know that's only the very beginning of that's only like barely touching the surface of your
Yeah, that is
story.
barely touching the surface, but that was the beginning of my motherhood journey. And already having two stepsons who at the time were five, it was like 5 and 3. And my son was almost 1. My daughter was a newborn. So those years of my life honestly are like a blur, but I know that I survived it. So
Yep, you're here.
the hardest part was done at that point. And my husband, he got out of jail when our daughter was 3 months old. So he finished out all the time that he had to do, came out off of probation, and met her for the first time at 3 months old. And we got married shortly after that. And then, well, okay, actually, technically, we got married at the courthouse with
Okay.
witnesses, the whole thing.
Yeah.
I never turned the marriage certificate into the state. I didn't know I was
Oh,
supposed to. I thought that the courthouse did it, but apparently the courthouse that we went to did not do that for you. And so I was supposed to turn it in, and marriage certificates expire after 6 months. It was on our second anniversary that I found the marriage certificate and read the bottom in really bright red letters that was like, you have to turn it back in. So I called the courthouse and explained the situation, and they said we'd have to get remarried at that point. So we got married
wow.
once, and it was never legal. And then we never got married after that. But I just call him my husband because it makes
Yeah,
things
he's been
easier.
your husband. You thought for
Yeah,
2 years he was your husband. So,
exactly. So we continued on together to have a third child a year and a half after. So my kids were born in 2013, 2014, and 2016. And at the time, I thought we had spaced them out more than that. And now that I look back, I don't really know what we were thinking. Because we did conceive her on purpose. I got off of birth control late 2015 to try to conceive her, and it took us 8 months at that time to conceive her.
wow.
And so then we kind of knew, okay, this it's not as easy for me as
Yeah,
everyone has kind of assumed, because I got pregnant twice on birth control
right.
after being told I couldn't have kids without fertility intervention.
And you didn't get pregnant at all during that 8 months.
I didn't get pregnant at all.
Wow.
And then we used a fertility lubricant, and we did end up falling pregnant with her. And I had a really smooth, healthy pregnancy. She was due October 16th of 2016. And she was also premature at 35 and a half weeks. So she was
Wow.
born September 6th. I went into labor on Labor Day in 2016. So that
Wow.
gave that holiday a whole new meaning for
Yep.
me.
I hope
I
that labor wasn't as long.
it wasn't as long, but it was still about 18 and a half hours before she was born. So
Oh
my
my
labors just
gosh.
kept really, they stayed pretty long. It never got easier or
Right.
shorter for me. So, but it could very well be the fact that I kept going into preterm labor also.
Right.
So I went in at 35 and a half weeks. I had already been on medication at home to stop labor with her. So it was basically, if the hospital could stop it, great. And if they couldn't, I was having a baby. And I went in and they tried to stop my labor for the first 12 hours. I went in at 3 p.m. on Monday, September 5th. And then at around 4 a.m. in the morning, they stopped trying to stop my labor because it wasn't happening. My contractions were still coming. They had given me all the IV medication they could, all the oral medication that they could, gave me the steroids for her lungs, and she was born by 11 a.m. That same day. I had her, and she immediately went to the NICU. She had a 3-week stay, so it wasn't as long, but it was just about as long as her older sister. We brought her home about 18, 19 days in her NICU stay. And she was a tiny little thing. All of my kids were under 7 pounds. And at this point, by my third child, I had never made it to a due date. So to this day, I've never made it to my due date, or anywhere really close. Like I've made it to 37 and a half weeks. So,
which technically is full term, but it's the very lowest end of full term.
Yeah. And I was really lucky that he was healthy and strong and didn't need any time in the NICU. He came out just ready to go. But my girls were early to the party, and they were impatient, which is on par for how the rest of this has gone until now. But yeah, we had 2 NICU babies. And at that point, my husband was able to be there for the birth of her. It was way different than the experience with both our son and our daughter because we weren't together when our son was born. He wasn't able to be there when our first daughter was born, and he had to really learn to bond with her 3 months after she was born and kind of learn about her. And it was the same way for me. I could only be with her 1 time a day in the NICU with my son. So when I brought her home at a month old, I didn't really feel like I had as strong of a bond, and I didn't know her cues. It was like, it just all was a really unnatural process. And once our second daughter was born and we knew we had to go through the same thing, I spent pretty much all my free time in the NICU since he was home. And once I was able to take her home, the bonding was a lot easier. It was just kind of natural for me at that point. The NICU became a really huge part of my birth stories, and they were our support system. So now I don't really know how I will do if I have a baby that is full term and doesn't have a NICU stay, because now I'm so used to the opposite side of the spectrum.
Did you have postpartum at all with any of your pregnancies? Yeah,
I did. I had postpartum depression pretty bad after all 3 of my pregnancies. Labors were long, deliveries were easy. No stitches, no tears, no nothing. So my healing time, my healing time was really like pretty fast, other than having an infection after birth, trying to heal from that. But for the most part, my body bounced back a lot quicker than my mind did. And especially with my daughter being in the NICU the first time, not having my partner there, and then going through it a second time with him, but it was his first time dealing with the NICU baby, and trying to decide at the moment that she came out if he was going with her or staying with me, because he couldn't be in 2 places at once. And so it was a new experience each time. All the circumstances were very different. I had 3 babies at the age of 22. And I thought I would surely become a mom for the first time at 25.
So you were totally off track as far as your plan went, like what you thought where your life would be. Wow.
Yeah, I was totally off, way off base. I hadn't attended college at that point. I hadn't really had a whole lot of life experiences other than moving out at a young age, and always having a job. I just really, I didn't do much. I just became a mom really fast and had bonus kids and a husband and a whole army of kids to take care of. At 22 was really kind of the point where I thought we had made the decision that our third child together would be our last, because she was baby number 5 for our family. She was our last for 5 years. We didn't start trying to conceive again until she was 4. And
So what did your
We,
life look like when you guys decided to start trying again? Like, what were you
well,
doing?
we separated for 2.5 years. We moved up to Boise from Twin Falls when my youngest daughter was just a couple of months old. We ended up separating, and he moved back down to Twin, and I stayed up in the Boise area. And we co-parented our kids long
Really?
distance for that whole 2.5 years. And then
Wow.
we repaired everything. We decided to get back together, and it was pretty sudden. It was on our daughter's 4th birthday that we decided to get back together. I was about to turn 25 that year. And so things were already looking a lot different for me in my career. I had built myself a career in accounting without
Wow.
any sort of college background. A company trained me, and I just started taking classes on my own, got certified. And so I was pretty good in my career at that point. I had already been a financial director for a couple of years. I was working for an engineering firm doing accounting for them when we decided to get back together. And so my life looked a lot different. I built a life with my kids and built a career with no background really,
Yeah, no
um,
education.
and just secured a life for us in a different place. And I was content. I had my 3 babies. I thought I was done. I knew that I would always probably have baby fever because I love being pregnant. I love having babies. And so I kind of
Right.
knew that whether I was truly done or not was a toss up,
Yeah,
but
you
I
knew
thought that I
yourself.
had accepted it at that point. I didn't want another one until we rekindled our relationship and we ended up back together. And our relationship is better than I ever could have expected it. It's
Mm.
always been pretty good, but we were both really young with a lot of kids. And I had a lot of growing up I needed to do on my own. I
Yeah.
had a lot of things that I needed to just experience. And I think kind of just figure myself out. I was just a mom at that point. I
Right.
didn't know what else I was. I just had a lot of kids, and people thought I was nuts because I had all these kids.
But little did they know you were actually climbing that corporate ladder with no education or experience previous. Like you
Yep.
were making a path for yourself in ways that
Yeah.
people couldn't see from the outside, I'm sure.
And it was really tough. It was growing years. It was formative years for both me and my children to learn that I was even capable of doing things outside of being a mother, that
Right.
I could hold a job and be a mom at the same time. It was it was something that we needed, but it was also a lot of time away from my kids. It was a lot of daycare hours, and
Right.
I paid about equally in daycare as what I did in rent.
Oh my
So
gosh. I can only imagine.
about over $1,000 a month in daycare and over $1,000 a month in rent and a car payment and all of the things. Like I had built a life for us, but it wasn't the most pleasant at all times.
Right.
And it was a lot of me being away from them
Mm.
in their formative years. My son started kindergarten the year that his dad and I got back together, and it was an interesting experience taking him to get registered and not really knowing what his preschool was teaching him because
Mm.
I worked 50 to 60 hours a week and saw him a couple hours before bedtime. I didn't truly know what he knew before it was time to start school. And so it hit me pretty hard when we got back together that I had spent a lot of time away from them, but also built a really good life for them in the process. And they have always understood that even as they were little because they see the growth. They grew
Right.
with me. I
For
had my
sure.
kids young, but we've grown up together. And so once it came time for me to take another huge turn in my life, my kids were there and supportive and just they kind of flow with the punches. They're not too hard to deal with change. They adapt well. They can kind of just
That's
go with the flow
amazing.
pretty easily. So we decided to get back together in 2019, we decided to start trying to conceive early 2020. And it really just came down to the fact that we were together, we were good, our kids were really happy, and we both didn't feel like we were done. We wanted one more. And so, with the fertility issues I had had previously, we decided we would start trying to conceive earlier than we were expecting to get pregnant because we knew it was going to take some time.
Right.
We didn't know how much time, but we knew it was going to take a little bit of time. So, right before the pandemic in early 2020, it was the first week of March, I went and had my birth control removed.
Pandemic week. I feel like first week of March, that's when
Mm-hmm.
everything changed.
And it was like 1 minute I was getting my birth control removed, and then the next minute things were starting to go crazy already with COVID overseas. And so we kind of already didn't know what to expect.
Right.
And we decided to start trying to conceive in March with my cycle. Luckily, my birth control never threw off my cycle. It was pretty regular. I tracked my ovulation. In the whole year of 2020, between March and December, we had gotten pregnant 4 times and lost the pregnancy all 4 times. By December, I was in my 5th pregnancy, and we lost that one in January of 2021. So I had 6 miscarriages in the time that we decided to try to conceive. And
those were your first miscarriages that you'd had up until that point, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And because of that, and because I had living children, doctors nobody wanted to run tests. Nobody really wanted to do anything. It was like, you have a miscarriage one time, and that's considered normal. And then it happens again, and they decide if that's still on the spectrum of normal or not. I was on the IUD for 5 years. My daughter was 4. I had it put in, I think, about 6 weeks postpartum. So I had that birth control in the whole time. We didn't know if it was the hormones still lingering in my body, like affecting pregnancy. We had no idea if my body chemistry just changed. We had no idea if my husband's body chemistry changed. We didn't really know what was happening. So we had our first 4 miscarriages with 0 answers. We got pregnant about every 2 cycles after a miscarriage, and we lost it within between 6 and 8 weeks each time. By that 4th one, I went to my doctor and I told her, I said, at this point, this isn't normal.
Right.
And I need to have some sort of answers as to what's going on, because I've already been told before my son that I wasn't going to be able to have kids. And I proved the doctors wrong 3 times. I beat the odds 3 times. But now I do understand that my fertility could have changed, and I really could be seeing what the doctor said I would. And so she ran some tests on me, and everything actually looked perfect except for my progesterone. And my progesterone was low. And once I did some research on low progesterone, I discovered that very well could have been a reason that I had 2 preterm babies. And nobody ever put 2 and 2 together. So
what a simple answer too, because I've been going through infertility for 2.5 years now with my husband. And that's the one drug that they keep putting us on is progesterone. Yep. And it's like, that's crazy to me that nobody even tested that.
No, nobody tested it. And speaking to more women, I'm in quite a few support groups online for trying to conceive, and for miscarriages, and now for pregnancy. A lot of doctors don't test for it. And it seems like one of the most simple things there, hormone-wise, when it's needed to support a pregnancy.
And common.
So, yeah, and you would think that it would be more tested, or that more doctors would think about that link, but I had to push for them to test that. I had to really sit there and basically tell them I'm not going to leave until you take a bunch of blood from me and test my hormones or tell me what is going on, because it's
Good
not even
for
like
you.
I didn't think I had PCOS, even though I dealt with cysts. I had a really normal cycle.
Wow.
I seemed to ovulate right on time. I seemed to have my cycle right on time, even after having 4 miscarriages at that point. Everything bounced back really normal. I pushed for them to just
Right.
test pretty much everything under the sun. They
Good
tested for blood
job.
clotting disorders and hormones. And those are the two things that are the most common for either both, infertility or a lot of reoccurring miscarriages with no explanation. Both of those things together can work against you. And so I tested positive for a blood clotting disorder. It's the MTHFR gene. And basically, it's just that my blood is too thick and it doesn't clot the way that it's supposed to, or it clots too much at times. And so it made it difficult for a fertilized egg to implant properly into my uterus because it wasn't getting the proper blood flow, placenta wasn't forming, all of those necessary things. And plus, my progesterone was so low that I couldn't support a pregnancy on my own. So after we got those answers, my doctor put me on baby aspirin once a day throughout my whole cycle. A lot of doctors do it differently, but she just had me take it once a day, every day.
Right.
And then through, let's see, when I would start my ovulation testing after a period, as soon as I got my peak for my ovulation, I would start on progesterone. And I fell pregnant pretty quickly one time after we discovered that. So our fifth pregnancy during that trying to conceive period. The pregnancy went on without bleeding. I didn't have a miscarriage on my own, but then I went into my 9-week ultrasound and I had a blighted ovum and no baby had formed.
What does that
So
mean?
so basically my body was producing HCG. There was a gestational sac. I felt pregnant. I had the symptoms. I was still on the progesterone, so I wasn't bleeding on my own.
Ah,
And I went in for my miscarriage and there was no baby, no fetus, and very high HCG levels. So I had to have a DNC performed
mm,
in order to clear that pregnancy. And it was like starting all over again. But it was still a positive because even though it was now our 5th miscarriage in a year, we knew that I could get pregnant and use progesterone to support a pregnancy, even though a baby didn't form that time. And so we got pregnant once more after our DNC in January of 2021. It was in April of 2021. And I had a chemical pregnancy. So I had a couple of positive tests and then started my period immediately after. Went in for
yeah,
blood work, and it was obvious that that's what had happened. It was a
right.
chemical pregnancy. And then I gave up, and that's how I fell pregnant with this one. And everyone thinks
Wow.
that I'm like nuts or crazy when I say that, because it's some of the worst advice that's ever been given to me in my whole trying to conceive journey, was that the minute that you stop trying is when it's going to happen.
Right.
But for me, this time, that's exactly what happened. In May of 2021, my husband got injured at work. So he was out of work. Trying to conceive was not really on my mind.
Right.
I had decided that I was going to be a stay at home mom and I was staying home with my kids and I was going to open a business. So my whole mindset changed to what my future looked like without a baby.
Right. You
And
started
then,
planning for that.
yeah, it was like the very last day in May, I took a pregnancy test and it was positive. And I was like, what?
What
I
is
couldn't even really.
happening?
Yeah,
Yes.
I knew that I had felt different. But we had intercourse one time in the entire month of May, and I did not track my cycle. I didn't anything. I just
Yeah.
felt sick. Like at the end of the month, I felt really sick. And I was only at that time about 8 days past ovulation. So
Oh
I
my
was
goodness.
freshly pregnant. I was barely 3 weeks pregnant. Took a pregnancy test. It was extremely positive, and it had happened to fall on a weekend. So I waited till Monday, called my doctor. She immediately gave me progesterone, and she asked me this time if I wanted to do any of the beta HCG blood draws to track progression. And I said no. I was like, no, I'm not going to stress myself out with it.
Yeah.
I'll take the progesterone suppositories, and whatever happens, happens.
Mhm.
Well, I am now almost 27 weeks pregnant with our rainbow baby, and we're having a
Woo!
baby girl. So
Yay!
we are nearing the end of our second trimester, and I am so far so good. Everything's healthy. Baby's growing
Yay.
more than ahead. She's about a week ahead at this point. She's big. She's in a pretty big percentile for her age, and everything is progressing really smoothly. So
Wow.
that's not how I expected to end our fertility chapter.
Right.
I thought that was it. I thought that the losses we had was the defining moment, and
Yeah.
that the universe was telling me that it wasn't meant for me. And so I was at peace. I came to terms with that and was like, okay, I'm not going to have another baby. And my kids, I had to grieve a lot of losses with them because they knew each time that I got pregnant. My kids are 7, 6, and 5. They're old enough to kind of understand what was
Right.
happening. And they had to heal with me through all of that trauma. And then I fell pregnant with a healthy pregnancy, and we had to kind of tread that as a family also. Nobody talks about being pregnant with a healthy pregnancy after infertility or after reoccurring miscarriages. And it's difficult. It's not blissful. It's anxious. I mean, it was anxious the whole time. It was kind of just a hurry up and wait process to see, okay, am I going to go to the first ultrasound and is there going to be a baby or is there not going to be? Is something going to be wrong? And then
Right.
going to that first appointment and everything looks good. And then waiting for the next milestone, right? To
Yeah.
hit your 12, 13 weeks and be out of the first trimester so that you can breathe. But you get out of the first trimester and everything looks good and you still can't breathe because now it's like, well, yeah, you've made it to the second trimester, but your baby is not viable until 24 weeks. So then it's another process to wait through your anatomy scans or any of the chromosome testing you can do, which I did do all of the blood tests that I could for this pregnancy just to make sure what my risk levels were for any sort of abnormalities, especially after so many losses. Everything came back low risk. That's how we got our gender. At 12 weeks, we found out we were having a baby girl through blood tests. And then we just kind of waited for our anatomy scan because even when those blood tests come back
Oh
low
yeah.
risk, there's still a risk that something
Mhm.
could be wrong. So we just waited to 20 weeks to get to that anatomy scan and see, okay, if everything looks good.
Right.
Everything looked good at 20 weeks. And then it was still kind of a waiting game to 24 weeks. And now we've passed that by a couple weeks now. I haven't had any sort of bleeding. I haven't had any sort of weird instances where I thought maybe that I was having a miscarriage. So everything is progressing well. And now I am mentally preparing for bringing a real human baby home
Yeah.
after 6 years because, wow, a lot has changed
Yes.
in that time. But yeah, we love kids around here. So
Sounds like it.
if we can't tell,
Yes.
I'm I'm treading homeschooling with my older children,
Wow.
being pregnant, running my business from home.
Yeah, tell
Um,
me about your business.
so I decided to open it's a crafting business. I do sublimation, which is an ink process. It's heat activated ink that I can press onto polyester clothing, any polyester items really. And it's a long lasting, no fade way to add designs to apparel or to blankets or to different substrates, for home decor or really anything that
Cool.
you want.
Do you
Um,
design yourself?
yeah, I do some of the designing myself, and then I also support other artists. So I buy a lot of digital designs off of artists. I
Yeah.
buy a lot of different licenses from places, to be able to use their artwork because I can't draw for the life of me. So my digital art isn't always as good as I would like it to be, or where a lot of artists are. A lot of my artists that I buy from, they hand draw everything. And so
Yeah.
all of their digital designs are still hand drawn designs. So I try to support them as much as possible because it's sharing is caring.
For
I don't know,
sure.
supporting other small businesses. I haven't even officially launched yet. I also do vinyl. I do quite a few other things, just anything that you can personalize. I do shirts for the most part right now. That's kind of what I've been sticking to,
Mhm.
practicing on shirts and doing some cups and some things. But I'm putting together an online boutique that just has some small boutique items, clothing designs that you wouldn't necessarily find other places.
Right.
Just trying to be unique and
Yeah.
offer a little bit of something from home. It's also something that my kids help me with.
So that brings me kind of to this general question of, do you feel like you have a creative processing method? You've listened to the podcast, so you've probably heard me explain creative processing, but I would love to hear what your personal creative processing method is.
Yes and no. I really, for me, the biggest thing was I wanted to be able to personalize things because I don't like what I find in stores most of the time, but I also have a hard time spending money on myself. So if I want some sort of graphic tee or something, I really would just prefer to make it at home, other than going and searching and trying on clothes that don't fit or whatever. So that's how this came to me. And then as I decided to start venturing into doing this as a business, and finding designs or trying to design myself, it really is just, it has to be something that jumps into my head. I can't sit down for like block out hours of every day to sit down and design something because I
Right.
can't guarantee that I can pull something out. It just, if it comes to me, it does. And if it doesn't,
Yeah. Oh,
it's
I
not
totally get
happening.
that.
I can't force it. So really, it's just if something jumps into my head or if I see a picture of something, or if I see something that I would like to see in a different way. I get a lot of inspiration from just looking at other things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So most of my creative processing comes from more of what I want to see.
Okay.
And it's, but there is no real process over here.
What about if you're like you're extremely anxious, or the kids are just, you know, motherhood can be overwhelming. So let's just say you
Absolutely.
need to carve out some space, right, for
Mhm.
you to just be okay.
Yeah.
What do you do in that time? Is that like listening to podcasts or?
Yeah, a lot of it is listening to podcasts. I watch more TV than I should. I
Same.
try to decompress in ways where I'm also learning, though.
Yeah.
So,
So
podcasts,
learning, that's your
yeah.
creative process. That ties into what you were saying earlier. And that, I feel like this whole part where we're talking about what you've been doing in your heart, from going from corporate
Mhm.
into owning your own business, is your love for learning is
Yeah,
apparent. And
it is.
that is a creative process in itself. I really believe in the power of healing through creative processing. And you've already had
Absolutely.
to do so much healing because, yes, your motherhood journey and story, like you've got so much healing that has had to occur and continue, I'm sure continues to have to occur. But
Yeah.
then even before that, we knew each
Yep.
other in high school for a very short time.
Hmm.
I lived in Twin Falls for like literally less than 2 months, but we
I
became
know.
friends. And I remember at that time you were already going through so much, and that was years
Yeah.
before your pregnancy. Because we were only
Yeah.
sophomores in high school at that time.
Yeah, we were babies. And I really did. I had a lot of life trauma that I've healed from. I had a teenage mother and a teenage father um, who were younger than I was when I became a parent. So I had a lot of things that I needed to heal from. And learning for me, that is kind of the way that I cope with most things.
Right.
Whether it's through podcasts or documentaries or reading articles online, um, a lot of what I do, I have to be able to learn. I have to be able to take away something from everything. I got sick of being mindless, and I got sick of everything being meaningless, and
Yeah.
kind of stepping away from old values that my family had. And it's easy to be overcome by like good money or
Oh, yeah.
possessions in the world or having nice things. All of those things, it's kind of easy to lose meaning.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize for so many years that I had lost meaning. So now I listen to podcasts on a pretty regular basis, mostly true crime.
Oh, I
I'm
love
a
true
crime
crime.
junkie.
Me too.
So,
Crime junkie. Is that what you just said?
mm,
I love true crime. So yeah, I'm a crime junkie too.
yeah, and I think right now, probably for the last 2 years, most of my learning has been in the true crime space and community. I help find missing people through a couple of different nonprofit organizations. It kind of started off as web sleuthing online and just listening to extremely unhealthy amounts of true crime podcasts. I get obsessed with certain cases, and I would do a lot of research on my own. I have notebooks full of different cases that I've kind of just researched on my own and found resources for. And then I came across a group of ladies that kind of shared the same purpose, and we all gathered online in an online community and decided to make it more meaningful. And so we started Missing Justice, which is a Facebook group online that just advocates for missing people. We don't solve the cases, we're not detectives, but we have resources for families. And so we help people, we try to help them find their loved ones.
Right.
Most of our team is in Las Vegas. And so if there's a case out there, we do get boots on the ground, and we have search parties for different people. We've done that for quite a few cases, but we advocate more for the families of the missing and try to help them come up with aftercare plans, since
Yeah, that's
in the
not something that law enforcement does at all.
yeah it and we work with law enforcement on everything that we do. So
That's amazing.
it has to be cases that have already been reported to law enforcement, and it has to be people that are truly missing. But because most of our team is in Vegas, we do see a lot of circumstances where people go missing due to life choices that they have
Mm-hmm.
made. And so an aftercare plan is important, because if your loved one is on drugs, or if they are dealing with homelessness, or if they are dealing with something in their life that has gotten them to the point that they're missing and you're looking for them, they have to have some sort of plan. We have to be able to offer a way to help them, to help bring them out of those situations sometimes. So that's what we do. We just
I
advocate
love that.
online, we spread the word. We try to get search parties together, and we work with the families just to give them their options and tell them, this is what you could do. These are avenues we could take. We try to get the families on different news stations. We try to get their stories out there, but it takes a lot of vetting on
Oh,
our
I'm
part,
sure.
and like interviewing certain people. It takes a huge online presence to be able to do that.
I love
So
that you've taken your passion for true crime and actually done something with it. Cause like that's what I do not do. I'm like, I'm gonna learn all about these cases and then I'm gonna go record podcasts.
I
But you know
almost,
what?
yeah, I felt like I had to almost,
I love that. I think that points to
because
your character.
thank you. It was just something that I know that a lot of people are entertained by true crime, but
Mm-hmm.
it spoke to me in what I felt like a different way, because I was like consuming this information on a constant basis.
Right.
I would listen to these podcasts at work, in the car, at night. I've probably listened to hundreds of thousands of hours of true crime podcasts. And so it almost felt wrong of me to be so intrigued by something like that and to not be able to do something positive with it,
I love
especially
that.
since the true crime community isn't always a respectful place
Yeah.
of victims or people that are having their stories told,
Right.
because this is someone's true life.
Right.
It is real for somebody. It's entertainment for a lot of us, but it's somebody's actual story, and it's
Right.
something that family members are living through, and it's something that people are grieving through. And some of the discussion that can take place in the true crime community isn't a positive place for advocating for those victims and those families.
I will definitely link all of the things that you've talked about in your group in the show notes so that listeners can join your crew. Are you accepting new people?
So right now, we started Missing Justice as a nonprofit, and I don't know, we're always looking for new members, but really, because what we do is not what people expect, like we're not private investigators, we
Mm-hmm.
don't do a lot of the things that people would expect. We're an advocate. So right now, I don't think we are accepting any new people, but I'm sure
Okay.
we will be. We have a Facebook page called Missing Justice, and it's just where we have, I think, about 8,000 members now,
Wow.
where you can post about missing people, and we try to share their stories there. And if there's updates on certain things, we do have some specific groups that we work out of the Missing Justice page, but for the most part, it's that page that we're advocating for. We want people to come in there and post about these people that are missing, that are not making it on the news. We want you to
Right.
post about these things that are being reported on social media, because not every case gets the same attention.
Yeah.
And if it's something we can help with, we will.
I will definitely link whatever you've got and we'll keep people updated as new things start happening with that as well. I have two questions for you to close out the
Yeah.
show. One, your favorite book or podcast, and two, your favorite
Mm.
song.
Oh man,
Are you a
those
music
are
person? I know I should have asked you beforehand. I'm going
I
to add it.
actually am a huge music person.
Okay.
But and I am not a favorites person.
It's okay if you share an artist or like a current favorite.
My favorite podcasts are My favorite podcast out there is Crime Junkie. I've been a Bonus Club fan member for like years and years and years. That's a podcast that I listen to the
Yeah.
most. My favorite book is really anything by Jodi Picoult. And 19 Minutes is a book that she writes about a school shooting that has forever been my favorite since high school.
Wow.
And it's just a very raw and emotional book from a lot of different perspectives. Coldplay is the artist.
Coldplay.
I can do a favorite artist for sure, but a favorite
Yeah.
song is not one I
That's
can do.
okay. That's okay. Coldplay all the way, all
Yep.
day.
Coldplay is my healing. That's my healing
That's
music.
another creative processing thing for you, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure. Oh, I love music so much. Well, thank you so much, Alyssa, for sharing
Yeah.
your story with me. And I am so excited for the listeners to be able to hear just all of the incredible ways that you continue to show up and be resilient and carry through the pain and parent through hardship and still prioritize yourself and your kids and are learning and are also helping a whole community of people through a obsession, sorry for lack of
Yeah.
better words, with
No.
true crime. But you're not just sitting with it, like so many of
Yeah.
us, including myself, we just take it in. But we're not doing anything with it. And you're taking it in and you're using that energy to serve. And that's a really beautiful gift. And just further evidence that you are created worthy.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being willing to tell my story, and I'm excited to hear what else you have coming up this season. I love everything that you do, and I love watching you. So I feel blessed to have had this conversation with you, and I will come back and talk to you anytime.
Yes, we will catch up again. Thank you, Alyssa.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Created Worthy podcast. If you want to connect more, you can follow along with me over at Danielle Damrell or Damrell Creative Co. on Instagram and Facebook. All the links to today's topics are in the show notes, and you can also find a link to my Patreon, which is where you can help support my mission on this show and keep it going. Ratings and reviews really do matter, so make sure to hook me up with 5-star review. Any less, I would rather hear your opinions over email. So anyway, if this episode resonated with you at all, share the love, send it to a friend, or post it on your social media. But don't forget to tag me so I see it and can share it too. I hope all of you have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you on the flip side.